In 1993, Toyota built an engine so ordinary looking that nobody in the industry bothered to write more than a line about it. Meanwhile, over in Germany, BMW's engineers had already given that same engine a nickname, and it wasn't a compliment, the appliance. To them, it was just another import engine, reliable the way a fridge is reliable, and about as exciting. Then years later, someone bolted that exact engine, completely stock, no upgrades, onto a dyno in Australia, and it kept accepting more and more power, 800 horsepower, 900, then over 1,000 on the same factory parts it left the assembly line with, while BMW's own prized engine from that era, the one inside the legendary M3, was already needing rebuilds after being driven hard for less time than that. One test run turned a car nobody respected into the most feared engine in the entire tuning world, and eventually got BMW's own performance engineers quietly looking at the numbers themselves to understand how a car people laughed at ended up outliving BMW's golden child. You have to go back to that factory floor before anyone, even Toyota, knew what they'd actually made. In 1993, Toyota launched the fourth-generation Supra into a world where BMW already owned the throne. The M3 was the car everyone measured against. Sharp, fast, and wearing a badge that meant something on any street in Europe. The Supra, next to it, looked like the heavier, softer option, a sports car costume draped over a car that wasn't quite sure it belonged in the fight, and its engine got dismissed even quicker than its looks did. That engine was called the 2JZ a six-cylinder with 2 turbochargers, and on paper, it made 320 horsepower, a number BMW's own engines could nearly match without any turbo help at all. Inside BMW, engineers reportedly described it as overbuilt, which sounds like praise but wasn't. Why use thick heavy metal and reinforced internal parts for an engine that was only ever going to power a comfortable street car? The assumption in Germany was simple. Toyota didn't trust its own engineering, so they just added more material to be safe. BMW trusted precision. Toyota, people assumed, just trusted bulk. That assumption missed the one detail that would end up mattering more than anything else. Toyota hadn't overbuilt this engine by accident, and they hadn't done it just to be cautious. They'd built it to survive brutal racing regulations in Japan and unpredictable rules in export markets, which meant their engineers made a call, designed the engine to handle far more punishment than a normal street car would ever throw at it. That one decision, made for reasons that had nothing to do with impressing anyone, is the entire reason this story exists. Toyota cast the engine block out of iron instead of the lighter aluminum most performance engines use, and used a design where the cylinder walls are fully supported by solid metal instead of hollow space. It's heavier, it's less elegant, but it's built more like a tank than a sports car engine. They also used forged internal parts, tougher, more expensive components that a 320 horsepower engine had no real reason to need. Nobody at BMW thought that detail mattered. The Supra came out, got reviewed as a slightly heavy alternative to the M3, and as far as most people were concerned, the comparison was over before it started. Here's what almost nobody caught at the time, and it's the part that explains everything that happens next. This engine wasn't just strong, it was strong in a way that had nothing to do with how it performed when it was brand new. Early comparison tests had the Supra running neck and neck with the M3, close enough that nobody thought there was more to the story. What those tests couldn't show, because nobody was even asking the question, was how much more the engine had left in the tank. The M3's engine was already close to its limit, straight from the factory. The Supra's engine was using a small fraction of what it could actually survive, and at the time, almost nobody on Earth knew that yet. That gap between what the engine was doing and what it was capable of would stay completely invisible for years, just sitting there quietly in garages and small tuning shops around the world, waiting for someone to find it. We'll come back to exactly how far that hidden limit actually went, but first you need to understand why this mattered so much to the people who eventually found it, because that's really where this whole reputation got built. Not in a factory brochure. By the mid-1990s, modifying turbocharged cars for more power had become a massive underground hobby, and tuners were used to a simple rule: push a factory engine much harder than it was designed for, and it breaks. Parts bend, crack, or fail entirely, usually fast. Most performance engines back then, including some of BMW's own, had a pretty predictable ceiling. People expected the same from the Supra's engine. Then they started pushing it anyway, and it just didn't break. Not barely held on, not needed constant babying, just held. Over and over, engine after engine, shop after shop. And word about that spreads fast in that world. By the early 2000s, that word had turned into a full-blown legend. Independent tests started showing this engine putting out 700, then 800 horsepower on parts that had never been opened up or touched, the exact same forged internals Toyota installed at the factory for an engine that was only ever rated at 320 horsepower. Some builds crossed 1,000 horsepower before anyone even bothered upgrading the internal parts, a number that, at the time, basically no other mass-produced engine from any brand could reliably hit without a full rebuild first. Drag racers started building cars around this engine that ran quarter-mile times normally reserved for purpose-built race cars, not a six-cylinder from a comfortable Japanese coupe. Meanwhile, BMW's own high-performance engines from that same era, including several versions of the M3, developed a well-known reputation for wearing out internal components under hard driving, sometimes needing serious rebuilds well before 100,000 miles. The contrast stopped being subtle. The engine, everyone laughed off, as an overbuilt commuter part, was now outliving, outproducing, and flat-out outlasting the car BMW had built its entire performance reputation around. This is where the story really earns its ending, because the reversal was not just about horsepower numbers, it was about how the entire tuning industry started thinking differently because of this one engine. Shops that used to treat the Supra as the backup option behind the M3 started building entire businesses specifically around this engine because it let them promise horsepower numbers that other engines simply could not survive without being torn apart and rebuilt first. One of the most well-known American tuning shops of the 2000s built its entire reputation on taking this engine, completely stock inside, past 1,000 horsepower, a claim that would have been reckless marketing with almost any other engine on the planet and was just true with this one. Owners started calling a totally stock version of this engine that had never needed an internal rebuild a unicorn, not because they were rare to find, but because finding one that had actually broken under hard use had become the rare thing. The joke inside BMW quietly disappeared. The engine, once dismissed as overly cautious and unnecessary, became the exact engine tuners pointed to when explaining why other engines could not handle the power customers were asking for. By the time this engine's reputation hit its peak, helped along by its starring role in mainstream car culture through the 2000s, BMW's own performance engineers were reportedly studying it directly, not to copy it outright, but to understand how an engine Toyota built for a completely different reason ended up outlasting engines BMW had spent decades refining purely for performance. The real lesson inside BMW wasn't about turbochargers or horsepower numbers on a page, it was about margin, about how much you leave unused. BMW built its engine to be excellent right up to the edge of its limits. Toyota, almost by accident, built an engine whose actual limits nobody had even found yet. In an industry obsessed with the number on the spec sheet, this engine won by having a number nobody ever bothered to print. Today, more than 30 years after that dismissive nickname first got passed around a BMW workshop, the same engine still shows up on dyno sheets putting out 4-digit horsepower numbers on parts Toyota built for a car meant to make 320. Modern performance engines, including current ones from BMW itself, still get compared against it in tuning circles, not out of nostalgia, but because it's still the standard people use when they want to prove their engine can actually take real abuse. The car BMW's engineers once treated as a joke became the engine every serious tuner still brings up first. Nobody at BMW calls it the appliance anymore. They call it what everyone else already figured out a long time ago. The engine nobody respected turned out to be the one nobody could kill. Let us know down below which engine you think deserves this treatment next.